we want to watch bats take flight this spooky season in October with the Bat Emergence Cam. And so I brought with me two of our project leaders who are James and Devon, who I'm going to shift the attention over to. James, you are the research director for the White Memorial Conservation Center. I would love to know what that means and why you're involved in this. So if you want to give yourself a brief intro, and here's more information about him as well as he gets started.
So I work at a biological station or a land trust located in Northwest Connecticut called White Memorial Conservation Center and Foundation. We have 4,000 acres and we have a whole bunch of hiking trails and places where people can go canoeing and kayaking. And we have environmental educators on our staff as well as foresters. And so one of the things that I do as a research director is I ask questions of this property and all the various habitats and try to understand how we can conserve the wildlife that we see and the resources such as the water and the clean air that we have here. We're one of the many reasons why people move to Northwest Connecticut is because of the open space that we still have left in this area. And so we do our best to try to figure out the best way to conserve it for the future.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for being with us. I'm excited to hear more about your work. And Devon, Dr. Devon, my apologies.
Hi, so I'm Devon Frazier, doctor, if you will, but not necessary. So I've been working with bats for a little over 15 years now. I am currently I'm a wildlife biologist, the lead mammologist for the Wildlife Diversity Program with Connecticut's Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. But I've got a long history of working with bats and various other species. My background is mostly in genomics. So I kind of left that world behind to just come and be on the ground working with awesome land managers like James and doing our best to monitor and protect our bats and other small mammals.
Awesome. Yes, thank you for joining us for this too. I'm excited to learn more. And funny that you'd move from genomics to this, so I'm assuming that it's way more fun to be in the field and working with outside the lab, hopefully, or at least that's fulfilling for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. All right. And before we go deeper into the project, our project leaders wanted to know how we felt about bats, our perceptions of bats. And so I'm going to have Roland drop a few polls for us, and myself and Bob, who I again forgot to introduce, and I'll have to do that in a second here. And Roland will also give our thoughts on these since we are active citizen scientists as well. So before I do that though, Bob, hi. Bob Hirschon's also here, and he's trying to unmute probably because it's not unmuted. Oh.
I'm sorry. Yes, I was muted. Actually, I was trying to vote, but panelists can't vote, so I was denied.
Yeah, we'll just have to say it out loud. Yeah, but you are our podcaster, so I'm super glad you're here so you can help us ask some really riveting questions. Yeah.
Sure.
What is your answer to this question? How often do you observe bats outdoors in your neighborhood?
They're fairly rare. I saw a couple at an outdoor event not too long ago, but they're kind of hard to spot. We're heavily wooded here, so you don't have that open sky where you can see them really easily against the backdrop of the sky. So maybe I'm just not seeing them, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't see many where I am in DC, but where I lived previously in Phoenix, Arizona, when I lived in a neighborhood in a house, like there was a time of night we'd walk like at dusk. During COVID, actually, me and my roommates, we'd all walk around in the neighborhood, and in this certain area, there were just like a ton of bats, just a ton of them. And I don't know where they were hanging out during the day. I'm not sure what location they were going to because I can't even think of any helpful habitats for them in that area. But
I think we have a shortage of bugs too, because it used to be they'd go by, you'd have like a street light and there'd be all these, moths and things around the street light, and then the bats would come in to get the moths. Now we have the street lights, but you're not seeing very many moths. Either they changed the color of the light so it doesn't attract as many, or maybe there just aren't as many bugs to attract the bats.
Maybe. Do we have a scientific answer for that yet? Devon or James, any idea?
All the above.
Yeah. There's been some pretty strong evidence to support that we are losing biomass of insects, and whether this is due to overabundant use of pesticides or habitat loss. There can be a variety of reasons that that's happening, but it is a concern for us that care and love bats so much that their basic food item, right, their prey source, is also diminishing over time. So
Yeah,
Mm.
and I
Right.
doubt it's because they're really good at eating them either, right? Like
they
there's
are really good at eating them, but only if they're there to eat, right? So,
right, yeah, it's not their fault, it's gone. They're
yeah.
source. It looks like most of our answers were either rarely or frequently, so that's good that we're seeing some bats, and that's not a never answer, but bummer. Do either of you live in areas where it's just common to see bats constantly? Would you be a common answer?
I have two that forage over my yard every night. And of course, if you go to White Memorial, you can see lots of them every night.
Yeah. I think if once you become attuned to where to look for them, they definitely tend to pop out a little bit more frequently. But they do have places that they prefer. And so it's sometimes the challenge is just finding those places where they prefer. Because when we do surveys on the property, we find them all over the place. But then when we leave the property and we go into maybe certain neighborhoods or we go into other kinds of land use patterns around the property, we don't see them as much. And so there's some places where they're common and some places where they're not.
Another thing too is that they're flying at night, right? So we're not really out there. You can't really see them at the bulk of the time that they're active. And if you happen to see them at dusk when they're starting to come out, you could easily mistake them for birds. So a lot of people might not even realize that they're looking at bats. They have a more erratic flight pattern that can kind of indicate, but if you don't know what you're looking at, you might not realize that I just saw a bat. So
That's so funny to think about. Like as a flying mammal that bats are, they're less graceful than birds. Makes sense, or more
they
erratic.
they look less graceful to us, but really I would say they're far more maneuverable and like amazing at what they do. Uh, Well, I don't want to diss birds, but bats are pretty incredible flyers and they're very
Yeah.
maneuverable and very good at what they do. But it does look like very spastic from our perspective for sure.
Yeah, not too much of a dig on birds as we're about to hit a big
Not
day.
trying to dig on the birds.
Speaking of where they are during the day, which you did not say, but I'll just bring it up anyway. How often do you observe bats inside of buildings? So for anyone looking at the polls, do you ever see bats in buildings? I personally only know of one instance because of a bat getting into a home and possibly biting a family member of mine, but we didn't know. So they ended up having to get rabies shots anyway. But it looks like, pretty much everyone has answered and they're all saying rarely. So apparently not never though. So that's good to mention. Had one in my house 3 years ago, says Jim. Ah! Oh, you know what? I do know of another. I think I have a cousin who had a bat in her sink drain. It just
Mm.
came out of the sink drain one day. She was in college and alone in her big house with a bunch of roommates, but not with a bunch of them at that point, and it was scary. Anyway, I don't know how often that is, but
Well, no, I had one just about 3 weeks ago in my house, and it was just flying around, and yeah, I don't exactly know how it got in. It might have come down through the chimney. I'm not entirely sure though. But all I basically did was just open a window, take the screen out of it, and then I just brought the cat into the bedroom with me, and he just had the cat had to be with me for the night, which he wasn't all that happy about, but that was it. And my suspicion is the bat was out of the house within probably just an hour or two. Once it figured out where the open window was, it just took off. But
having your cat with you, is that just like a stay away from this human type of situation? Or why bring the
no,
cat?
more just I didn't want the cat to go running around the house at night chasing this bat while I was trying to get some sleep.
Yeah.
I mean, the cat, it would be like having a wild animal running through the house all night. So I just decided I'd probably be best to just keep the cat with me.
That's very fair. Okay, I would probably forget to do that, but makes sense. Okay, so if let's say we see the bat inside a building, how likely do you think it is for you to be bitten? How likely? I don't have I feel like we are scared of bat bites because of rabies, but maybe it's really not all that common.
Very rare, yeah. It's a very rare phenomenon. Yeah.
If you chase it and go bashing at it, then it probably increases the likelihood.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And anything that's feeling threatened is going to, every animal is going to bite if it feels threatened or try to protect itself. And going back to bats being in the house, what James did is exactly what you should do, is just open a door. The bat doesn't want to be in there. There's not a lot of bugs in your house. So it just kind of like is in there, open a window, the bat will figure out its way to get back out. And they're not aggressive animals unless they feel threatened. They're really not aggressive at all.
No.
It's good to know. And that's probably a part of the animal slander. They're not here to bite you with their scary teeth or anything. They're here to flap around.
And
And
rescue you from mosquitoes.
yeah.
Far
Oh,
more dangerous, and they do want to bite you.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
and it looks like our general answer here then is rarely, just from knowing that from our expert answers. But let's go ahead and open the next poll, which is about outside. If we're outside, how likely do you think it is for you to be bitten? And I think we have a poll, or the poll should drop down in a second here, so we can see what everyone else thinks while on the call. Awesome.
Yeah.
So is this a never situation, rarely, frequently, common? I'm gonna go with never. Just outside. Oh, sorry, this is for inside a building. Let's pretend it says outside because we'll just skip this one.
I know it's outside.
Oh, now it's switched. Poll technical difficulties, apparently. There's too many polls, so now you have to do a double poll. There you go. And the answer is the same anyway. Most of you are saying rarely, waiting for a couple more of you. Any other answers?
Yeah. Very rare.
That's good. Do we have stats on that?
I think it's
I'm
so
not sure.
rare that it wouldn't even
Yeah.
warrant a
It-
study. I mean, unless you're, again, if you're disturbing the bat in some way or handling it without
Right.
gloves, which is never should be done. That's a
No.
no-no.
Big no.
You're not, the bat's not gonna like fly on you, land on you and bite you. They don't want to get tangled in your hair. They don't want to do,
Ah.
oh, am I jumping ahead on poll questions?
No,
no, you're
that's
good.
exactly right.
Sorry.
That's exactly right. I mean, they're more serious about trying to find food, or a mate, or whatever they're trying to do. They have other things on their mind. You are not really important to
Yeah.
them.
Exactly.
Super unimportant to them, which I love that. Thank goodness. If they really liked us, I don't know. Actually, I don't know. Pet bat? No, never mind. I won't think about it. But
No
that's
pet
not
bats.
fair to them. When you see bats, how much are you afraid or curious about them? So of all of us responding here, are we curious people about them, or are we nervous about them? Are we mostly afraid? Are we indifferent? Maybe you, oh, wrong one. Can we go back to the poll? I think it should be 4.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, no, I'm sorry. It should be 6. This is
Yeah.
the one that we swapped. My bad.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay. How much are you afraid or curious about them? So if you're on Zoom, you just got tricked and now you have the right one in front of you. Fooled. All right. I see mostly curious so far. So if any of you are contemplating your answers and are like, oh wait, I'm more fearless than that, I should also go with mostly curious, but it's also completely anonymous. So feel free to be afraid. You are welcome to be afraid over Zoom. Oh yeah, it says mostly curious. And that also could be because you chose to come to a bad event. So we might have
biasing in
a
the
bit of a
sampling.
bias here, yeah. I myself would probably say more curious than afraid, because there's always that like intrusive thought of like, well, what if I just die of rabies randomly? But that's such a intrusive thought that's so unlikely. And so the curiosity about bats in general should overcome that. Yeah. Were you two always super cool about bats, curious, not ever afraid, or was there ever a time where you were like, oh, I don't know if I want to study bats?
Nope.
No.
I
Yeah.
kind of grew up in nature and not really being like my parents. I drive them crazy because I've got a pet spider. My mom was just visiting. I've got a pet spider living on my sink. I told her not to kill my spider because he's hanging out and he's eating all the. Anyway, I don't think I've ever been afraid of bats. What?
This is just a spider that lives in your home, just by
Yeah,
the.
her name is
Yeah.
Penelope.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
She's
How
just
big is
living. She lives in my bathroom. Anyway, just to say that I've never really been afraid, but I didn't think a lot about bats when I was younger, just because you don't see them. You know, I was more like, I'm going to study lions someday or wolves. But then once I met a bat up close, I was obsessed from the get-go. So,
That's awesome.
but never been afraid. I don't
Yeah.
think.
Similar story, James?
Yeah, I was always outside. I grew up in a pretty much a fairly rural area, and I got a chance to just go fishing after school and hiking and so forth. And I was always really interested in just being outdoors and exploring things and trying to understand how it sort of all fit together. I encountered bats similar to Bob, like seeing them in the streetlights and those kind of things. And so they were pretty mysterious to me, but it was never something I had really a chance to study closely. But the more I've learned about them, the more I get curious about them.
I
Yeah.
love them. I didn't love them. I mean, I didn't like, but we lived in a sort of rural area in Massachusetts, right near a swamp. And so we had lots of bats when I was growing up. And I found that when we were playing Frisbee, sometimes they would chase the Frisbee, not as a food item, I assume, but probably out of curiosity. So then, we'd go out at dusk and then fling the Frisbee up and see if the bats would like come over and check it out. So that was kind of a lot of fun. Well, fun with bats.
A UFO to the bats.
Yeah, like what is
Yeah.
it?
That sounds fun.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would be willing to do that, but that also, I mean, that does sound like something that I would see.
That I would do.
neighbors. Yeah. I could see it right here. All right, so now that we know a little bit more about the perceptions of bats that we all have on the call with us today, now we should actually talk about the project. So we want to know what the project is all about. This project is called Bat Count Bat Emergence Cam. Sorry, my brain just decided to undo itself. And so the first question I'm going to ask, and I'll actually drop the screen share in a second so we can see your faces properly. But we want to know about the research team. So what are you all trying to accomplish through this project, and where did the research team come about? So I know it's a partnership across two different entities. So how does that work? And I'll stop my share for a moment here.
Duan, why don't you talk about where the funding comes from and the generation of it?
So I came to Connecticut from California in early 21 to join Connecticut Deep. And since it was like mid-COVID, there wasn't really like a very clear picture of what my job was, or we couldn't really do much. And so one of the first projects I was handed was, hey, we have the funding in place for this project. The funding came from something called the Wildlife Tax Check-Off Fund, which means during your tax returns in the state of Connecticut, you can opt to donate your return to this fund that is then secured and facilitated and held for projects that specifically have to do with outreach in some regard, but essentially just protecting wild species. So it's a really great kind of way to donate and promote and protect your local wildlife. So that was one of the first projects I was given, and I contacted Jamie pretty early on, and we've been like simpatico geeking out on all things science and ever since, and especially bats. But we had the funding in place, so I like somebody had dropped the ball, or not dropped the ball, but just switched positions, and so it was handed to me. So I got it going. We ordered the cameras. Jamie really has done all the leveraging and the technical and the the heavy lifting in terms of getting these cameras in place. But the idea is there's multiple kind of goals or agendas. One is to obviously the counts. That's the part that like people can engage in most easily and directly, which is just counting the bats as they emerge. And so usually when we do emergence counts at a colony, you do it once, twice, maybe 3 times, 4 times a year. And there can be a lot of noise, on hot days, maybe not all the females actually come out, or rainy days, maybe some of the females have gone to a satellite colony. So if you're only taking 2 or 3 counts in a year, there's a lot of noise and a lot of variability in those counts, and you're not really getting that true number, how many bats are actually in this colony. So by having a camera and a live stream where people can on a nightly basis log in and check in, we're getting a lot of data, but we're really like kind of reducing a lot of that noise and getting closer and closer to that really critical information, which is how big is the colony and is it growing or is it shrinking? So that's one of our goals. Second goal, or maybe this is the first goal, I'm not really sure the order, but bats have a PR problem, right? I mean, not in this group. That's amazing to see that everybody's mostly curious and not scared of them, but that's not the case across the board. So demystifying bats, giving them some like up close and personal experience with how absolutely fascinating and beautiful and cute and all the things that I love about bats are, getting people to see that. And then third are some kind of ancillary questions that we have the opportunity to answer, and we haven't really figured out how to facilitate these as a data collection source that people can participate in. But we certainly encourage anybody's curiosity. If there's a behavioral question and you're curious about bats, I mean, I think students can use this as a resource to answer phenology question. Well, the state cares about phenology questions. I'm starting to ramble, I'm sorry. So the seasonal timing of events, when the bats return, when the pups are born, when the pups begin to fly, all of those things that can be linked to climate, which is an important question. As climate changes, we want to know how species are responding to that. So we get those seasonal timing questions, but then there's also just all of these other behavioral cool questions, like how often do bats groom themselves? How often are bats social versus, solitary in a roost? Those types of things. So how active are bats with regard to ambient temperature, and what do they do on hot days versus cold days, and all of these things. So the number of questions are limitless. That's kind of where we're at with it.
It's kind of incredible that this is the start of like one method to answer a bunch of different questions. And one question actually about that I have is, in general, what's with the location? Is it just the one location? Like, how do you know that this is the colony? And like, are you allowed to go in this building to count them? Aside from like setting up cameras and such, like how is this chosen? Is this the only location?
Well, right
So
now
far.
it's the only location so far. Yeah. In Connecticut. But this is a barn. It's been a part of our property for a couple hundred years. Like most buildings in Connecticut, they're quite old. But we use it for storing equipment. It was used as a dairy barn back in the day, and now we use it to park trucks and tractors in, and all kinds of lawn equipment and stuff. But up inside the rafters are the bats, and we've been counting bats as they leave the barn for years now, and so we wanted to learn more. So when Devon and the state of Connecticut and came up with this funding and they came to us, we were like, absolutely, we could make it work. We'll do everything we can to make it work. I mean, logistics were a little bit of a challenge, but because it's trying to put internet into a barn, which isn't commonly done, and then putting high definition cameras inside a barn, again, not commonly done. So there were a few little logistic hurdles there, but once we got everyone on board, it was really quite impressive how quickly it all came together, and we're learning extraordinary things about our bats that we never knew before. So we're
Care to
learning
share any of those tidbits?
Yeah, well, we're learning when they give birth. We got a chance to see birth for the first time. That was really exciting.
We caught one on we caught a live birth on camera. It was amazing.
Yeah.
Twins.
Whoa.
She had twins.
Wow. Oh yeah, I heard that it's usually only one generally. So having twins too, that's also kind of abnormal, or is that pretty normal for these? Also, it's the big brown bats, right? So we kind of need to talk about that and back up a little bit in terms of what species is being researched and why, I guess. But is it usually just one? So that's even more abnormal?
So different species. So bats are kind of unique in the across mammals in the sense that they're really small, but they're really long-lived and they have a really low reproductive rate. Typically, most species just have one pup per female per year. You can imagine if you're a flying mammal and you weigh 7 grams and you've got to carry there's only so many babies you can carry. Big brown bats are known to have twins, and maybe this is increasingly common. Maybe it's more common now that there's fewer bats and fewer competition due to white nose syndrome and other factors. We don't really know those questions, but we are hopefully going to be able to use this camera to answer that. But then other species, there are a few species that can have more than 2 pups, like the eastern red bat. They can have up to 4 pups per year, but typically it's only 1. They're very low. They're not like, rodents that are breeding quickly.
Right. And you mentioned white nose syndrome, just for anyone who is not aware of what that is. Is it fungal or is it?
Yeah.
Fungal
Yeah, it's a fungus that was accidentally brought over from Europe or Asia, where it's quite widespread, but the bats have had probably tens of 20,000 years, however long, to adapt to it. But our bats were just immunologically naive to it. So it kind of is wreaking havoc on our North American populations here.
Even more of a reason to participate in this then, absolutely. Yeah. Is there anything else about the big brown bats? Is it just because their location is very central to Connecticut where you're looking, or are there other species around that you're also trying to research?
Yeah, so big brown bats, one of the reasons, going back to your previous question, which is like, is this, why this barn? We chose to do big brown bats because they are our most common species. And while they are affected by white nose syndrome, we only lost about 30% of them, which in of itself would have been alarming. But when you compare it to the 95% of other species that we lost, they're doing actually pretty well, and they still seem to be pretty ubiquitous across the state. Like, we pick them up everywhere. So they're doing really well, which is great. And so that's why we selected this colony as opposed to another species colony that's on the same property. Because we just didn't want to compromise or cause any undue stress to the more sensitive species. These guys do not care that we're in there. They are, they're not bothered by us when we're going in there and going about our business. And they're a hardy species. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm glad. Yeah, no, I'm glad they're not bothered. I'm honestly trying to find an analogy for like if someone were to walk into my home and I wouldn't care, but I'm having a hard time of thinking of a of an analogy for that. If anyone thinks of one, let me know. So we're kind of lucky that they don't really care. So this project, you have a ton of volunteers. You sent me some pictures that I'll show right now of people actually being there and watching what I assume is watching the some of the emergence of some of these bats, but I know that this is primarily an online project. So are there multiple methods of participating beyond just being on the live stream side if you're outside of Connecticut? Like, what was this event about?
So absolutely, there's the live stream portion, but one of the beautiful things about White Memorial is that we're open 24 hours a day, so you can come out here and go stargazing at night, or watch bats as they leave the barn. And so if you happen to be driving through Northwest Connecticut, or you live in Connecticut and you happen to be just in the area, we encourage folks to come by and visit the barn. The museum is called the White Memorial Conservation Center, and we're located in Litchfield, Connecticut. And you can look up our website and see our street address to get here. And you'll see the big green barn. You can't miss it. It's right next door to the museum. And you can see the bats flying out of the western side of the apex of the barn, the western peak. But if you can't make it to Connecticut, then you have the online version, the live stream version, to see the bats as they're leaving the barn. And in some ways, it actually may even enhance your observation, because the cameras are so well equipped that they can pick up such low light levels that you could probably see more bats flying out of the barn after it gets too dark. But personally, I appreciate people who want to just go out and get an ice cream cone and come over here and look at the bats as they're flying out of the barn. And it's a great treat to spend some time nice and quiet and enjoy seeing the bats as they get out and for the first time that night and go looking for insects.
Yeah, I like that. It's certainly a treat in addition to the sales pitch for ice cream. So thank you. You also appear to have these nice steak-like items with bats on them as buddies.
Yeah.
People are walking around. You said this was about a hike.
Yeah, so during our launch, we had a bat hike, and our education director put these together as stations along the hike. And so in Connecticut, we have 9 different species of bats. And so every station, she had a designated species, and she would stop and talk about bat facts and trivia and things that people might want to learn more about bats during that hike. And so it was a really great way to sort of designate a spot for each by having those sort of cutouts on a stick, bat on a stick kind of thing. So
I love that. We need to do that more during bio blitzes everywhere. Take note for anyone who may be interested in leading a project. You should definitely do this. I am now going to take a moment just to show everyone how to actually participate if they're not in Connecticut and not able to be around in person. There is a SciStarter project listed, and also Roland did drop it in the chat, so I'll go ahead and head there now in my weird extra window that came up. So if you take these steps for you, it would be to go to that project page on SciStarter, and then you select visit to be redirected to the project. And then there's a get started button to start participating. So I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate, and then my friends here are going to tell me if I'm doing anything wrong. So if I visit citsci.org, which is where it's located, you can get a lot of information here. I noted the get started here just because it gives you some basics, but it looks like I can jump over here to get started, or what would you prefer?
That's great. Yeah.
Uh-oh. There was one that worked earlier, so I wonder if that one,
Okay.
oh man, let's see. I can go to a different page instead. I actually checked this earlier, so that's kind of funny that it's not wanting to work. I can just look it up instead. So White Memorial, I'll copy and paste. It's probably something wrong with the URL. Ta-da!
There we
Ta-da!
go.
There we go. You gotta copy and paste it. All right, so now I'm looking at the live stream, which unfortunately, time of day wise, we're kind of out of luck, right? This is not a good
Yeah.
time.
But
Oh, wow.
but you know what you
Well-
could do is if you hover over and look under other views, bottom right hand corner, there's a little button that says other views. You click it up, those are the inside cameras. And you might be able to see some bats hanging out on the inside cameras. And I sort of see a couple in the upper central area. I see a bunch. They're kind of far away with this camera, but
Yep, right
Oh,
there.
we
is
have
it
to get up and clean the cameras.
this group?
But yeah, those are bats, and you can just sort of take a look around inside the barn. But then we have the camera on the outside for the dusk hours.
Mhm.
And if you scroll down the page a bit, you might have to minimize yeah, there we go. There are three links there. And so we have a user guide, and we also have underneath that, we have a data sheet. Yeah. But there's an almanac there that talks about that shows what time of day is sunset here in Litchfield, Connecticut. And so, for example, if we look up today, which is October 1st, and we just a little further, there we go. Sunset is going to be at 6:35 p.m. tonight. And so what we encourage people to do is come out or to visit the live stream about 30 minutes before sunset, so that people can start counting tonight at 6 o'clock, for example.
Mhm.
And you just watch that camera number one, the outside camera, and you count the number of bats that are leaving the barn. Now, there's a couple pieces of data that we'd love to have people also recording, and so you may want to have a little piece of paper on next to you when you're doing it, because we'd love you to record what time did you start, and using the code, the camera timestamp in the upper right hand corner of the live stream is really important here. And then obviously we need a start time and we need an end time, but we also would love to know what time did you see your first bat? And again, using the timestamp is really important.
Gotcha.
And
Nice.
then we just want to know how many bats are leaving the barn that you counted leaving the barn, and how many bats did you see coming back or re-entering the barn during that time frame when you started and when you ended, between that time period.
Oh.
You can see that we have the temperature and weather conditions. We'd love to know what temperature it was here in Litchfield at the time that you did the count, and what was the cloud cover like, and any other special observations that you might want to include. So, and we've had some really interesting views coming out of this camera. We've seen shooting stars. We've seen really amazing sunsets, because again, they're colored. It's color camera, so you see some beautiful images sometimes when counting bats from anywhere in the world. But that's the basics of it. And then we have a Google form that you can for the data sheet. You enter all that information, and we've been using that information to sort of come up with some interesting analyses so far. And that's the basic mechanics of the emergence counts right now.
Yeah. It's very like user-friendly, easy, and you even have a user guide that goes into more details too, which is nice. So if anyone needs
Yeah.
more information, you can go straight there. I'm gonna go ahead and drop this link in the chat, because it is the direct link that will
Mhm.
be replaced at some point on that main page. But here you
Mhm.
are. And it looks like, so Jim, our ambassador Jim, mentioned partnering with astronomers and observatories with all sky cameras. I wonder if he means that's a recommendation for you all, if that ends up being helpful for scaling it in the future.
Yeah, I was aware of those cameras. I'm really interested to see how we might be able to help. I've seen some interesting phenomena recorded in those cameras, and seeing the astronomy folks get really excited about a shooting star and like looking for where it might be landing using the and analyzing the trajectory. And it's like, wow, I would never have thought of that. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. Maybe we could join in on that too. I don't know. But yeah, that's really interesting stuff.
You don't have audio recorders, do you? That, you know, those bat counter ones that they it lowers the frequency so you can hear them
Yeah,
echolocating or communicating.
not on this live stream, no. Although that was something in the early days we were discussing and we're still going to look into.
Mhm.
It's definitely a possibility. It's a question of just working with the companies that work with those microphones and how do we get that information up there. Um, but using that data is something that Devon uses frequently.
Mhm.
Using those ultrasonic microphones.
Yeah, because you can tell the species when you know, just by listening to their calls.
What do the big brown bats sound like?
What does the fox say?
Mhm.
So big brown bats you actually can hear. They do have like audible vocalizations and they'll
Oh.
chatter. They kind of do it
Oh.
and you'll hear them. But when they're out and like doing their thing, it's ultrasonic, so we can't actually physically hear it with our ears, but then you can put it through a special software that can like look at the calls and be like, oh, this is a tricolored bat or this is a big brown bat. And you can slow down the the audio within the software, and then it just sounds like some chirps. They're just like little chirps. Um,
Right, yeah.
but if you
I've
play it
heard,
fast, it just sounds like clicks. Just click, 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 click,
Uh.
click. And it's done. It's crazy.
Wow.
I've heard that the sound inside of a colony where you can hear a lot of bat noises, that's all them bickering, like just kind of like move over, Bob, you know, type of reaction, type of thing. Is that true for all species or true in general? I think I heard it from a reputable source, but who knows?
Yeah, I don't think we really know what the bats are talking about. We haven't figured out how to like, decode their language or anything. But I think that's a fair interpretation of it. They definitely kind of bump each other with their wings and they crawl right over each other, but then they're also super social. They're grooming. Part of it might be to just like establish who they're hanging out with, what their clique is, like, and then where their babies are. Like it's been demonstrated that bats can recognize specifically their offspring and discern that from somebody else's baby, which is an important thing to do in nature. So, yeah, they're definitely using their vocalizations to communicate with each other. We just don't know what they're saying.
Yeah, and they can't. Well, these kind of bats have very poor vision, right? I mean, fruit bats and some of those other bats have good vision, but these guys probably have to rely on smell and sound mostly, right?
So bats, like in terms of like, and what we can tell, again, we can't really see how a bat sees, but based on just like their rods and cones in their eye, they probably see about as well as we do.
Oh,
These little
wow.
guys, even with their itty bitty little eyes. And at night, they
Wow.
probably see marginally better than us. Fruit bats, the ones with the big eyes, the flying foxes,
Mhm.
they have amazing vision that like puts ours to shame for sure.
Ah,
Because that's what they're relying on. But these guys, they're not blind. Like that's definitely not, that's a myth that bats are blind.
wow.
They don't
That
see as well as they hear, but they can still see.
Huh. Interesting. Wow.
you
But
must
you're
have,
right that they are mainly relying on auditory, you know,
Yeah, and they don't
signals.
migrate, or do they?
Yeah, they do.
They
So
do.
there's kind of two camps of bats. There's what we, in Connecticut, at least, or in North America, we kind of group them into tree bats and cave bats. Tree bats, these guys tend to not form big colonies. They tend to roost, as the name suggests, on the outsides of trees. So they're not like the ones that are inside your attic. They are known to migrate quite far distances and they don't hibernate in the
Oh,
winter. They migrate. And then even the guys that do hibernate, they can still fly between their summer and their winter roost locations hundreds of miles, if not more, or
oh.
less. It depends. But they're definitely moving across the landscape seasonally in very, very far ways.
Hmm. Wow.
Hmm.
Yeah, we were just I just did a podcast on the fall bird migration and came upon a type of bat that takes advantage of the fall bird migration because it eats birds. It's a
Ah,
bird-eating bat, and they've come to zero in on the different, they eat songbirds. They don't eat like geese, but they eat small songbirds, and they know the flight paths, and the bats will gather there to grab birds as they're heading in this case, south.
I have
Yeah.
never heard of that. That's fascinating.
Oh, wow.
Similar to that, but opposite, there's these big colonies of free-tailed bats that come out of like under the bridge in Austin,
Oh,
or
yeah.
like they come out in this massive column every night, and there's millions of bats coming out of these caves, Bracken Cave, et cetera. And the hawks will sit there and
Oh,
perch off and wait until that emergence happens, and then they just fly through a cloud of bats and pick off bats as they come out. So it's
mhm.
interesting. It's like retaliation.
Bird eat bat, bat eat bird world out there.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
crazy. No one's safe.
Mm.
If there are any questions from the peanut gallery, now is the time to ask before we go into trivia mode, because now you have to see what you learned from today to see if you learned anything, A, and B, if you remember certain things that were mentioned.
Oh, we haven't talked about bat boxes. Are they useful at all, or are they just like, because I know a lot of people do them and then they get disappointed because they don't appear to have any bats, but they might just be putting them up wrong or building them wrong or something.
Yeah, so all of those things that you just said. So bat boxes are incredibly useful. It's a valuable conservation tool. We encourage people to throw up a bat box anywhere and everywhere, except for do it in the right way where it's more likely to get colonized. So bats want a lot of morning sun. They need that warmth to help them gestate and incubate their babies when they're pregnant, and then also for lactation. High heat helps that with energy costs and everything. And so you want, 6 hours of direct sunlight starting in the morning. You don't want them put on trees because that's like predator alley right there,
Oh.
right? You're just providing predators with a way to access the colony. So a
Mm.
pole or a side of a building is best. Bats know what they want, and and so another thing that's important to know about bats is that the females return year after year, their daughters with them, their granddaughters, their great granddaughters, year after year, they return to the same place. They go hibernate in the winter, they come back to that same place to have their daughters and raise their babies. So basically, once they've found, that golden jewel place that they like, they're not likely to leave it. So unless the population is growing and the colony gets too big for its current thing, then they're not likely to go and seek other places. But hopefully, bats populations are recovering, and so we need more and more spaces to house them. And so it can take years for a bat house to get colonized. And oftentimes you don't even know it's being used because it's not being used by a colony. But males, let's not forget about the males. They like having places to go in the summertime too. So even if you don't have like 100 bats, you might have 3 male bats, little bachelors that are using your bat house. Jamie came up with a really cool system to be able to tell. So you can cut a piece of PVC pipe or any sort of catchment and like place it under your bat house. And if you start to see poop accumulating, then you've got bats. So yeah, don't get discouraged if your bat house doesn't get colonized right away. But if it has been like many years, then maybe think about moving it or trying to, be more alluring for the bats. Great question.
Yeah, I have like nearly 20 bat houses on our property here, and maybe only 2 or 3 get used regularly. The rest, even if the bat just hangs out in the bat house for half an hour to digest a meal, I personally think that's acceptable. I think that's perfect utilization for a bat house. I mean, a bat house could be used for a migratory stopover. It could be, these long distance flights, 600 miles, to fly to their hibernaculum, maybe several thousand miles to get down to to go south or someplace south in the somewhere warmer in the wintertime. I mean, they need a place to hang out and just for a few hours, just to rest. And so to me, that's acceptable for a bat house to be used.
So there are no forest bats because we're so heavily wooded here. I don't know. There's very few places that get 6 to 8 hours of sun. So do they just not hang out here? Or maybe they go really, really high where they can get sun or something?
Yeah, so the colonial species, those cave bats, like the big brown bat and little brown bat, the ones that are tend to form the big colonies. And some species do. So there's, I think one of our trivia questions gets at this, so I don't want to like jump the gun, but there are a lot of different types of bats. And so they all have different strategies for how they handle things. Probably like there's a lot of species that do have colonies. They're just going to be smaller colonies in trees. They're very selective about which trays they use. Oftentimes it's the tallest tree in a system so that it can get that extra height and get a little bit
Yeah.
more warmth and direct sun. We haven't figured out how every single species selects for what their roosts are, just because it's a lot of work to study bats and track them to their roosts and figure out what they're doing. But
Mm.
rule of thumb, if you're trying to use a bat house and attract bats, those species that will use the bat house are going to be the ones that want that warmth,
Mhm.
that kind of attic
Mhm.
feel.
Yeah.
But there's also tree bats.
Wow.
They're just not going to use a bat house. So like eastern red bats, silver-haired bats, they're just roosting on the outside, like on the bark or in the foliage of the trees themselves. So you'll still
Ah.
have bats in the forest, but they just might not
Okay.
use the bat house.
And we're coming up with all kinds of new designs for bat houses as we learn about what they want. So there's been a lot of diversification that have been tried, and we're trying to put up these sort of houses in places and see if the bats like them.
Mm.
And sometimes they like them and sometimes they don't, but we're trying our best. And scientists are trying to figure out what's a good bat house, what's a bat house that gets used more frequently, when does it get used, how, and so we're learning how to do some real estate development for bats at times too. So
They're so alike us in more ways than we think. I have two quick questions, then we'll run to the trivia so we have enough time to go through the questions. But I have a very terrible example of what not to do, I think, in terms of how to be friendly to bats. My family used to have a house in Prescott, Arizona, where we had bats just show up and were like hanging out above a back rear door. We had dogs and kids around, so we were like, oh, we probably should figure out what to do to make it more safe, which now I'm like, it was probably totally fine and we didn't need to do anything about it. But regardless, are you like on a mission to destroy all forms of those bat noise makers where it's supposed to detract from bats coming near? I think it's supposed to like mess with their hearing or something. It's like a pulsing noise. It sounds terrible, honestly. I'm just wondering if that's like a big old no-no in your book.
No, in fact, I mean,
Okay.
compared to going and poisoning a colony to get them out of people have done it. So it's, it's horrible, but people do that. It's illegal in most places as well. But no, I mean, acoustic deterrents, I don't know how well they work. I mean, I've heard people that it works really well, that, they put it and the bats will just like shift or leave the colony. Some people are like, I've used those. I put on lights and heat and everything I tried and the bats won't leave my barn. So I don't discourage them by any means. I just don't know. They're not 100% effective. Did they work for you?
I feel like they did. Or it did work at some point because there was a noticeable difference in the amount of feces left over next to the back door. It was only like a group of okay. I'm being confirmed by my uncle. Yes, he's in the audience. He's like, I'm gonna call you out on everything. Thank you, John. So yeah, they did leave. Yeah, I remember there was definitely fewer instances where I was there and there was leftovers from them being there. There's only a couple of them though, so it would make sense if it's logically, I think it would make sense for a couple of bats to be affected as opposed to a colony. But it seemed like a great living place for them. Now I wish we had a bat box to leave there. Speaking of bat boxes, in the case of using them, what would you recommend as like the best resource to go to in terms of what to choose for a bat box? Do you have any recommendations?
Most of the state agencies in the United States have really good designs on their wildlife division web pages. So I think that's where I would first start, is because you want to first learn if you need to paint the bat house. Like up here in Connecticut, we have to paint our bat houses black just so that they stay warm enough and get warm enough fast enough.
Sure.
But if you're down in Arizona, you actually want to paint your bat house white. And then across the continent, it's any gradation of color in between. So the state agencies would give you really good guidance on what to think about in terms of those specialized considerations. And they'll be figuring out what bats you have in the state and so forth. Beyond that, then you start looking at organizations like Bat Conservation International, provides quite a bit of, and Merlin Tuttle, who used to work for Bat Conservation International, but started his own organization because he's retired and he just can't give it up. Which more power to him. he just keeps going. He's got his own books and things that he's published, and so we've got a lot of champions of bats that are trying to encourage people to do the right thing. And I think that another thing to possibly really consider if you have the space is not to overlook how planting native plants in your yard is really beneficial. You may not have the best location for a bat house, but I'm sure you will be able to find some native plants that can grow in your yard, and they will foster insects. By controlling invasive species and non-native species and fostering and encouraging those native plants, you're doing an amazing thing, not just for bats, but for a whole range of species.
Right.
And we really have to do a lot more work in that endeavor. And bats will come through your yard and visit if there's insects there that they can eat.
Provide the food, they will show up just like any college student. Free food.
That's right. That's right. Universal bait for college students or peanut butter, but yeah, you can. I don't know if you can do that for bats, but it'll attract insects, and that'll bring the bats in.
There you go. Yeah. All right. Before we run out of time, I do want to go through some of these trivia questions. If anyone needs to leave at the hour, you just might miss my last outro. But we are now going to test our skills to see how good we are at all these, which I think, Roland, this is going to be number 5 potentially because we're going backwards for this first one. But in all your brains, think, how many bat species in the world drink blood? Would they drink blood? Any? None? 3? 20? 1,000? What do we think? All right, we're unsure. All right, well, someone was very sure. They went with 20 right off the bat. Oh, we're very split. No one knows. Wow, okay. I have a feeling I looked this up once when I was younger and was like, yeah, I found this one. So my answer would have been not on this list. So now I'm just not sure what to say. I'll give you 5 more seconds to answer, and then we'll get the real answer. 3, 2, 1. Okay. All right. We were very split. What is the real? It's definitely not 1,000. That much we know.
Yeah.
3.
So, number 3.
It's 3?
Yeah. 3.
Okay. Which do you remember the species names?
So there's the common vampire bat, Desmodus rotundus, and then the other 2, which are the bird. So that's the common one feeds on mammals or specializes on mammals, and then the other 2 specialize on birds. So of those 3, you only have to really worry about one as a human.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the name of the other 2 vampire bats because I've never actually worked with them.
That's okay. I probably looked up the one that was human blood drinking. So that is.
And that's the one that everybody sees, the common vampire bat. They have they're phyllostomid, so they have the little leaf nose and they look really scary, but God, they're really cool.
I'm gonna look up a picture while you're answering this one.
Yeah.
Do bats provide around the world? Which one? And you can only select one, but guess what? The final one does say all of the above and
Kind of
more.
a giveaway. Yeah.
You're learning while doing this.
Yeah, that's right.
The best, and one of my professors back in the day said, the best tests are the ones in which you learn something while taking the test, which I hated at the time. But now I see the value in it as a non-college student. It looks like we all said all the above, which the options were bats eat insects that harm people, bats eat insects that harm crops, bats pollinate plants, disperse seeds, and bat guano, which is their feces, fertilizes crops. They do all those things and more.
All those things.
Does
Does everybody know where tequila comes from and who we have to thank for tequila? Because it's bats.
I was gonna say, is the answer bats? And very briefly before the next question, even though I'm definitely running out of time, just for the sake of knowing.
There they are.
There they are.
He is. Look at their little vampire faces. Oh, this one is just so cute.
They do. They have such cool
Oh,
little
is it?
faces.
Oh my gosh. That is Dracul. No, what's the
Oh, it is a vampire bat.
yeah.
Jekyll and Hyde. So you guys can see those the lines in their ear, how it kind of rolls, and the fact that their nose is shaped like that, those 2 features of their anatomy is helping facilitate echolocation. So the leaf nose kind of filters the sound back towards their ears and helps spread it out as they're making the calls, and then those ripples in the ear are directing the sound and kind of parsing out the frequencies and allowing the bat to really hone in on something in the dark. So
That's so cool. Oh my gosh.
anatomy lesson.
Yes. All right. Another question. How many bat species have been described? I know the answer to this one, I think, because I listened to Merlin Tuttle interview a bunch of times. I love that guy. He's called the Batman,
Yeah.
which is just great for him. So how many? Wow, someone's like 1.4 million, without a doubt. There's no, there are many, many, many. A couple more seconds. We're almost to 100% participated. I'll give 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, fine. All right, we're split, although I disagree with the main answer. We're split across 1.4 million, 140,000, and 1,400. My choice would have been 1,400.
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
That's correct. Well, I'm surprised by that because usually when I tell people how many bat species there are, they're really surprised. Like most people are like, bats, aren't they just bats? Like there's one kind of bat.
Right, yeah.
So cool
Yes,
that you guys,
everyone on-
yeah, that's a cool little learning lesson for me. I'm learning stuff too.
Even if we like bats, we don't necessarily know how many species there are. All right, what about hibernation? Do all bats hibernate? I have no idea, but I have an inkling. Got 5 seconds to answer since we're out of time. 5, 4, do that. 2, 1, and time's up. And you did a great job anyway. We only are missing one person, so we've got mostly no. Not all bats hibernate. Is that correct?
Correct.
That's correct. Yeah.
Nice. Bummer for you, one person who said yes. Sorry, I'm not trying to be mean. But now you know. Awesome. All right, what are baby bats called? This is one that I was like, oh, do you remember what was said earlier in the presentation? Because we definitely talked about this, or mentioned it. Yeah. All right. It sounds like we might remember. That's good. All right. Cub, kit, fledgling, pup, and calf. All right. 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. All right. You're out of time. And it looks like we know our answer. All of us
Yay.
said
Yeah.
little pups. Isn't that just the cutest? Cutest thing. All right. We did talk about this too. So I'm not exactly in these words. So it's interesting to know if that it's actually like this or not. But do they clean themselves like cats and clean each other? Do they groom each other like cats? Oh, wow. We are super confident. Awesome. Yeah. Okay. And Paul, it seems like people are saying, yes, it's true. Is it like cats? Like they use their tongues? Saliva?
Yeah.
Wow. Huh. Go figure. Man,
Watch it on the bat cam.
Yeah.
They do it a lot.
I'm definitely gonna be watching the back cam later. Bats have belly buttons. Do they? Yes or no? Okay. 5 seconds for all of you who are not sure. Oh, one more person? Ah, okay. It seems split, actually. I would have gone with true because they're mammals and live birth, but I don't know.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yes.
Although when I first saw this question, I was like, because I've handled hundreds of bats, I can't say that once have I ever been like, there's its belly button.
Oh, really?
But
Like it's not noticeable, really?
not
It's
noticeable.
go figure.
But yeah,
But you're
Really?
working
Yeah.
with really small species too. So
Yeah.
I wonder if you worked with those big fruit bats, I wonder if fruit eating bats, if they would have a big belly button. That could be
there's so many pictures of them on the interwebs. I'm gonna
Yeah.
do some deep diving to see if I can find a bat belly button.
I will Google bat belly button after this, but I also don't want to show it on the screen while I'm searching it, just in case. I don't know
Yeah, that could
Devon-
you could
just-
open up a
Devon's-
strawn show.
Devon's search history will accommodate it. So
my work computer. Why are we looking up bat belly buttons? Are bats the only flying mammal? That's our question. Our last one. Last one to make it a good answer. Or, whatever answer you think it is. Is it true or false? Are they the only flying mammal? So let me be a devil's advocate here. Ever heard of a flying squirrel? Oh, I did fool some people potentially. Can't take your answer back. All
They
right.
glide.
Like, some are saying false, some are saying true. I would say it's true because they glide. Yeah, Bob, I agree with you,
Yeah.
right? Is it
that's
The
that's
trues
right.
have
It's
it.
true. Yeah, it's true.
Yep.
Yeah, flying squirrels are gliders. And there's a few other species that are gliders too in the world. So colugos and things like that. There's some really cool mammal species that glide.
In fact, they used to think that bats evolved from the same branch that carries the colugos, which is a gliding mammal. They assumed that like gliding was the first obvious step before flight, but that's not true at all. Bats, yeah, it's a curiosity how bats actually evolve. They cluster with like a big group of mammals that don't include anything that we would have thought. Not shrews, not rodents. Anyway,
We could have full, like, multi-hour conversations about bats, I'm fairly positive, because this is just, I want to know the evolution. I want to know more about bat boxes. I want to know more. But unfortunately, I'm already past my time. So all of you who are still on with us, thank you so much for being here past the hour. Oh, before I get to that, actually, before I do any of that, let me drop my screen share. Thank you so much, both of you, Devon and James, Jamie, for joining us for this. I really appreciate all the knowledge you brought us, and that you got to play these trivia games with us. I'm so glad that you added those to there, because now I'm very excited to ask my friends
Well,
these questions and irritate
You're
them.
welcome, Emma. Thank you for sharing the project.
yeah, absolutely. It's
We look
real
forward to
fun.
working with folks.
Yeah, absolutely. And then for everyone who's still online with us, just as a heads up for what's next, if you're interested in space, your time is nigh. Space Week is next week. So October 8th, we'll be talking to Redshift Wrangler. So we'll be wrangling the cosmos, galaxy light, and having some fun there. And then after that, we're going to talk about EyeWire and decipher the mysteries of vision. So if you're into neuroscience, that's a great one for you. And then Citizen Science Month is April, but we're already planning. We have been planning since May 5th. And so if you are interested in being involved as a facilitator, on October 22nd, we have an awesome event for you all. If you are interested in being a participant, just stay in the know with us at SciStarter Live and SciStarter related stuff, and we'll just keep you updated so that you can have the next step ready for you when it comes. So we have a bunch of resources. I'm going to close it on that, but I hope you can join us next week to talk about wrangling the cosmos. And I'm going to go ahead and stop my share for a second so we can do a final thank you and goodbye. But thanks to everyone who stayed on past the time. I'm glad we got to answer so many questions and figure out what we knew about bats. Thank you so much, Devon and James. I'm glad that you could join. And we'll definitely hopefully see you again. And happy Halloween season to anyone who's like, yes, bats, Halloween, let's go it, spooky, all the above. Any final commentary for the crowd?
Just to say thank you everyone for participating, and get out there and share the bat love.
Yeah, exactly.